Welcome back to Medical Monday. I'm here with Dr. David Gnewikow from Advanced Hearing Solutions in Mount Juliet, taking your questions today about hearing solutions, basically, or hearing loss and ways to remedy that. The number is on the screen. 615-737+ is the number to call. We have the lines open. We thank Bruce for starting us off today. I do want to go back to that first office visit, Dr. Gnewikow. We've talked a little bit about it, about how you set things up. And I did mention before, it is free.
Sure.
Why do you do that?
Sure. So, when we see people for the first time, as I was explaining, we kind of bring them in and interview them. We do that visit at no charge, and we call it a free consultation because I want people to have the opportunity to interview us, as well as us kind of interview them. You know, having an audiologist a lot of times is sort of a relationship.
Sure,
because
it has to be.
I'm going to see you, or my audiologist is going to see you for multiple visits over maybe the first few months, but also hopefully over the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to continue to work with that person. And so there's got to be a match there. I want people to understand kind of our policies and how we do things. We try to make this absolutely as simple as possible to say, let us explain what the problem is. We're going to suggest a solution that we feel like is really going to work, and we let people try that solution for no charge. I mean, it's a no-brainer, really, if you're having hearing problems, to say, okay, let's have a free evaluation, let's test it for free, and then decide, you know, okay, what are the kind of cost and benefits of that relationship. We actually do an hour-and-a-half appointment, which other doctor friends of mine are like, an hour and a half? I see 7 people in that. But what we do is a lot more detailed. It's almost counseling as much as it is hearing testing, because I really need to understand, tell me what is driving you to this appointment. And I don't just mean your wife driving you to this appointment, although sometimes that is what's driving them to the appointment. It's what are the situations where there is, I constantly hear these 2 words, frustration and embarrassment. You know, it is, I am frustrated with my spouse because I'm listening as hard as I can and I can't understand what he says, or I am embarrassed at work because the boss said something and I can't hear in a meeting, and it sort of reaches this tipping point to where the resistance, and that may be because of financial reasons, or that may be because of cosmetic reasons, to say, ooh, I don't want to talk about hearing aids. There reaches a point where that embarrassment and frustration sort of offsets the resistance. And what's funny about that is most of the time, once people have finally said, all right, let's do it, a month later they're telling me, I should have done this 5 years ago. This is not what I expected. You know, I thought this was going to be big and bulky and ugly and loud and whistle, and none of that is true. A well-fit hearing aid is comfortable and easy, and you put it in and you forget about it, and they're rechargeable and they're waterproof and they're Bluetooth, and there's all these cool things that we can do that make that process very simple and easy and not this huge cumbersome problem. I think people are thinking about that old guy that used to sit in front of them, you know, and they'd mess with it and squeal and church. That is not what hearing aids are today. In fact, if hearing aids do that today, if any of you have a hearing aid that you're turning and it's squealing, something's wrong. Come see us and we'll help you.
There you go. Let's jump back to the lines. Linda is waiting ever so patiently. Hi, Linda. Thank you for calling in. What's your question tonight?
Yes, I've had fluid in my ear for several months. The doctor said it will reabsorb. The fluid will, and I was just wondering a solution.
Sure. Okay, Linda. So I will agree with your physician that told you that. Fluid is a very, very common problem. It's usually caused by what we call eustachian tube dysfunction. And eustachian tube is the tube that connects your middle ear to your sinuses and throat. So if you ever yawn and you hear that pop, that's the eustachian tube opening. The eustachian tube's job is to release pressure. So when the eustachian tube is not working right, it actually creates a little pressure or suction, which can cause fluid to be in the middle ear. That's probably more than you wanted to know when you asked that question. So most of the time, the first treatment for fluid, especially in an adult, the first treatment is give it a little bit of time and do something to maybe control sinus pressure. So a lot of times they'll recommend, and I'm not an ENT physician, but I'll just kind of say what I see from my patients and my experience. A lot of times the physician will recommend, you know, a nasal spray to kind of keep the pressure down. But I do think giving it a couple months is probably the right first step. Now, what most physicians will do is say, okay, we identified that you have some fluid. Let's bring you back in 2 months. Let's check you again. If it's still there, then they may consider either doing a tube in the ear. So again, kids have that all the time. Put a little tube in the eardrum. Sounds terrible, but it's painless. They just poke a little hole, put a little tube, which actually is used to alleviate that pressure. So it does the same thing as the eustachian tube. Or sometimes the physician, rather than putting a tube, especially an adult, will actually poke a hole in your eardrum,
Ooh.
which again sounds bad, but it's not. They deaden it with a little local anesthetic. And that alleviates the pressure, and the eardrum heals itself back. And so most of the time, that might be a first kind of quick in-office treatment to say, okay, let's do this first before we sort of pursue the tubes. But I don't disagree with that. I think that's probably the right thing to start with. I certainly think if it persists for months, it's probably worth checking in a little bit more.
Linda, hopefully that helps you out.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Thank you for calling in. You know, I have a question that Linda reminded me of. When I first moved here, my allergies were going haywire.
Sure.
I think with everybody. My physician on my annual visit said, you do have fluid in your ears. Are you hearing okay? And I was. But she said if that continues, it can cause hearing loss.
Sure.
Is that correct?
Sure. Well, it won't cause permanent hearing loss unless there is some major infection that's eating away at, you know, bone and things like that. Fluid in and of itself can cause a temporary hearing loss.
Right.
So probably what Linda experiences is, it's a little bit harder for me to hear. I can remember my son when he was 3 and 4 years old. He couldn't hear anything that we were saying to him, and I thought he was ignoring me. I took him to the office and tested him, and he had fluid in his ears, because it's like walking around with an earplug. But when that fluid either alleviates or releases itself, or by some medical treatment is improved, it is not a permanent condition that's usually caused by fluid.
Good to know. Oh, we had Ken. We just lost Ken. Ken, if you're out there, give us a call back and I'll take you right away. We're talking about that first visit to the office. You were talking about doing the free of charge, giving folks a chance to try out hearing aids. You have said before, hearing aids are pretty much all created equal in some respects. Can you explain that? Because there are different companies out there.
That is not what the ads in the newspaper tell you. Okay,
exactly.
So this is my opinion from having done this for 21 years. How people hear with hearing aids has far less to do with the brand name, the model, the size, or even how much you pay for it. It has far more to do with how those hearing aids are fit and adjusted. We had a caller earlier, I think his name was Bruce, was saying, you know, they try to adjust them, and that is the key. And I've taught this to students at Vanderbilt. I have preached this to my audiologists that have worked for me. I would rather somebody have a pair of hearing aids that are what we call entry level, that are fit and adjusted and set where they need to be to their prescription and made comfortable, than them by the top of the line, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 I've heard is that much, and them not be adjusted right. Because all of the features and bells and whistles and technology aren't going to help you if they're not making you hear better. And so I'm not saying, you know, I have my favorite models and brands, but to me that's more about durability. It's more about customer service. You know, I know for a fact that if I use this brand, you know, and we have a problem, they're going to take care of it and they're going to stand behind it, or their warranty is better, or these tend to last a little bit longer in my experience. But I certainly wouldn't tell somebody if they come in and they've got brand X and I've got brand Y, oh, well, brand X is terrible, you need brand Y, because that's far more about having them adjusted correctly than it is what brand is on that case.
Good to know. Okay, Ken is back on the line with us. Hi, Ken. Thanks for giving us another try. What's your question tonight?
Hello?
Hi there. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, my name's Ken. And at an early age as a child, I had an inner ear surgery because I swam in a polluted lake. And for many, many years, apparently the doctor had left some gauze in my ear. And at the age of 22, I went to a doctor because I was having bad migraines, and he pulled a piece of gauze out of my head, and I literally passed out. And I haven't been able to hear anything out of that ear since. And my hearing in my left ear has deteriorated over the years. I'm at 53 years old now. I'm having a harder time hearing my wife, simply because everything she says to me, I think, is the most important thing in the world, and I don't want to miss it.
Sure.
That is so sweet.
Yeah.
And it's important to me that I hear everything she says, because you know, it may be critical. It may, and I love you. If you don't hear an "I love you" from the person you love, you know, how do you say it back? You know what I mean? And it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I want to be able to hear what my wife or what everybody else is saying to me.
Sure. Ken, I'm going to put you in my next commercial talking about how important hearing is. But he's exactly right, because hearing is not just being able to raise your hand when you hear a beep or hear my phone ring. Hearing is our connection to the people that we love.
Yes.
Hearing is our connection to the things that we love to do. You know, this week, I will get back to your question, but this week I fed a gentleman who was going elk hunting. And he called me from New Mexico to tell me how awesome it was that he could hear the elk bugling that he hadn't heard. And so he said, I had no idea kind of what I was missing. And so what Ken's talking about, although I think your wife is more important than an elk bugling, don't get me wrong, but it's just that connection. And so, you know, it's very unfortunate what you had happen when you had surgery. But just because you had surgery that really damaged your hearing doesn't mean that it can't be helped. And I will tell you a story that happened about 7 hours ago in my office. I saw a gentleman who had had surgery in both ears, one about 30 years ago, one about 20 years ago. He and his wife are sitting in my office. He's explaining the problem. When I tested him, I told him literally word for word, I said, you are the biggest slam dunk I'm going to see all year as far as being able to help you. Because sometimes people think, well, it was a surgical problem and a hearing aid won't help. A lot of times when it's a surgical medical problem, the structures of the middle ear have been damaged, but the inner ear is still in good shape. Now, I can't say that for Ken over the television, but a lot of times, and that was the case with this gentleman that I saw this morning, his inner ear was normal, but because he'd had surgery and things had been messed up, the sound just wasn't getting through. We're going to fit him with some hearing aids and absolutely change his life, because he's going to go from hearing 20% to hearing 90%.
Wow.
Now, I can't say that I can do that necessarily for everybody, but I would say Ken is absolutely on the right track to say, hey, there's really important stuff in my life that I am missing, and absolutely it can be helped. Now, what can we get you to 70% or 80% or 90% or 95%? That does have a lot to do with the type of hearing loss and how much damage there is. But going back to what we were talking about our initial evaluation, that's what we do. We say, here is your hearing. Let me explain what's happening. Let me explain what benefits there are, what limitations. But I feel like in doing this for 20 years, I can pretty accurately tell somebody, okay, with what I see on your hearing loss, I would expect this amount of improvement. And we're pretty accurate with that. Now, sometimes it's not what people want to hear, because sometimes I tell them we can only improve you 50%. Whereas the gentleman this morning, I was so excited to tell him how much we were going to change his life. I couldn't wait to explain that to him.
Yeah, I bet. Well, goodness, Ken, thank you for calling in, and we're going to give Dr. Gnewikow's information throughout the next half hour. So get a pen and paper ready, and gosh, I just hope you end up with the story just like your patient today.
Sure.
All right, we're going to have to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, more of your phone calls and more talk about hearing solutions with Dr. Gnewikow. Stay with us.